Hi there, I'm Des.
And I'm Tim, and together Des and I head up the men's ministry Momentum Australia.
Momentum has multiple functions, but primarily our aim is to help men to succeed in life, to do life better.
We run a weekly radio show that goes all around Australia where we talk about anything and everything that relates to men.
And you know, we encourage men to do life in community, to do life with other men where we can be accountable, we can be welcomed, we can be open and honest about what's happening in our world.
We'd love you to have a look around our website. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find a bunch of resources to help you on your journey and all of our previous episodes and topics.
We thank you for your interest in Momentum Australia, and we hope you enjoyed this video today.
Okay, welcome to this week's Momentum. It is wonderful to have you tuning in. Thanks so much for spending some time with Tim and Des again this week as we step into this week's show. And I'm super excited about this week's show, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Let's throw to the man himself, Mr. Des Kennedy. How are you this week?
The man himself. That's really cool. I love getting that sort of acclamation. It's really cool. It's really interesting, you know, what we do with Momentum. We had a guy this week who contacted us from Brisbane, and he, you know, he's come to the end of himself. He's had a really great life, and then all of a sudden his life has taken a bad turn. And we get to deal with these sort of issues all the time, and it's such a blessing that we're able to do it. So it's such a great thing that you and I do, Tim. It's such an honor.
That's great, Des. And you know what? The truth is that men and women do reach out to us fairly regularly at momentumaustralia.org. That's our website, and give us a scenario perhaps of what's happening in their life. Ask for some help, ask for some feedback, ask for some degree of connection. And we do want to encourage you to come to the website, momentumaustralia.org. And of course, there you'll see the care line, 1-800-000-636. If you need a confidential conversation about something that's happening in your world, you can do that with somebody on the care line. And of course, the YouTube channel as well. You might actually be watching us right now. We'll give you a smile and a wave. But yeah, look, it's great to be on all the platforms and spread momentum out there, and encourage you to do the same as well. If you're getting benefit and a blessing from the show and you're finding it useful, share it with your mates, because we all need to get connected as men. That's one of our hearts at Momentum. You know, for most of us, having the sex talk with our parents was probably likely one of the most embarrassing interactions that we've ever had in our lives. In fact, some of us may have actually never had the talk with our parents because they were simply just too embarrassed to actually broach that subject with us.
And that's certainly the truth for me. I never had that conversation with my mum and dad. And yet in today's that's right. And yet in today's overtly sexualized society, with things like pornography, sexual content, sexting, being introduced to our kids at an earlier and earlier age, like 13 and younger, it is so important that we as parents are on the front foot rather than the back foot when it comes to educating our kids about this area of our lives.
Dr. Patricia Weerakoon is an Australian Christian sexologist. She's also written several books, each focusing on a different aspect of sexuality. And she teaches that sex is a gift from God, looks at sexual ethics from a Christian worldview.
She often speaks to Christian schools and conferences. In fact, I first met her at a church conference on Christian education, and she's our special guest on this week's Momentum. Welcome to the show, Patricia.
Wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure.
So great to have you here, Patricia. And from the videos that I've watched in preparation for this show, I just love the way that you are. You're so free. You're so light. Even now, it's like you're just lighting up that little space. I'm super excited to get into this because, as Des said, and you know, for him, he didn't have the conversation with his parents. I remember my dad making a few comments around the way, but it was very awkward and clunky. And you know, we discovered a lot of stuff by talking to our friends and all of that stuff. So we're going to unpack all of that in this week's show. PatriciaWeerakoon.com, by the way, is Patricia's website. Would encourage you to just jot that down and go and have a look at some stage. But Patricia, I am curious because I think you said you were 77 when we jumped on the call.
I'm 77 years old.
Congratulations. You look really well for 77. You look glowing. But tell me, how does somebody with respect at your age do this for their life? Like, how did this happen for you that you stepped into this space of talking about sex and sexuality and helping people, I suppose, you know, explore this area? How does that happen?
Wouldn't anyone keep young if you're always talking about sex, right?
I guess so.
So anyway, how did I get into it? Let me just give you the quickie version. So I was born in Sri Lanka, very conservative Tamil Christian family in the tea plantations.
Wow.
And the only way I could get out of having an arranged marriage was to study really hard and go to university.
Wow.
So
Right.
I went to medical school basically so they wouldn't arrange a marriage for me. And did really well there and got a scholarship after medical school to study in Hawaii. And there I worked with a sexologist. At that time, we're talking 1980, one of the
Wow.
world's best known researchers in gender. Went back
Wow.
to Sri Lanka, by which time I had met and married my husband. And was a sexologist in Sri Lanka, very busy, 20 million population. Moved to Australia 38 years ago, and my son and husband and myself was an academic with Sydney Uni and developed programs in sexual health. And I was director of a graduate program in sexual health till I retired. And as old ladies do when they retire, I thought I'll be with my knitting. But I prayed to God and said, use me. And so, 7 books and multitudes of speaking engagements later, here am I, old gray-haired old lady, still speaking about sex. Why wouldn't you stay young?
Did you knit the sweater that you're wearing?
Sorry?
Did you ever get to knitting? Did you knit the sweater
Oh,
that you're
yes, I
wearing?
knit and I tat
you do
and I
knit,
write
okay.
novels and everything in my spare time.
Oh,
And I
wow.
love cooking.
Right.
Oh,
It
cool.
sound like you have a lot of spare time, but that's okay. So tell me, Patricia, just scooting back to that part of the story, when you got alongside the sexologist, at that stage you hadn't stepped into the space. What was it and what is it that still draws you to be in this space? Why do you think for you particularly it's important for you to be in this space?
Yeah, I realized very early when I was in Hawaii, I was studying the science of sex. And I was worshiping in a wonderful evangelical Baptist church. And I realized that, the world thinks sex is something that's easy and like objectified and to be used. Well, God has such a wonderful narrative. I tell young people, I said, the Bible is the best sex book I have ever read. From Genesis, the first book, to Revelation. And of course, Song of Songs in the middle. Whoa,
Yeah,
what erotica. So, it's just such a beautiful, good narrative of man and woman and one flesh. So I realized that I could bring my twin passions of God and sex together. And ever since, I haven't stopped being excited about my twin passions.
I mean, it's interesting what we're talking about today. And I mentioned earlier the fact that my mum and dad, who are both Christians, they were embarrassed, or they didn't want to talk about educating me on sex and what's good and what's bad and what works and what doesn't work. And so there's probably a lot of parents, Christian or not, who are in that same camp, who just are embarrassed to have that conversation. So I guess we should start with the basics. And what is it that makes us uncomfortable about talking about sex?
Well, a couple of things. You already started it by saying that no one talked to you about it.
Yeah.
So if your parents haven't talked about it, we talk of children building scripts, a script in their mind. So when they're building scripts from a very young age, you and even young people who are now parents of children, they were not taught. And so they grow up getting these scripts that sex is something that is not talked about to the children.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we are seeing a generation of parents coming up who got their information from social media and even pornography. And so that's another thing. One, you haven't got good scripts. And 2, you got unhealthy scripts. So all of this will prevent you from actually talking to your children. And then you think, maybe if I talk to them, they're going to run out and start practicing sex.
Yes.
And the reality is that is so wrong. The research clearly tells us that if the children have heard from someone who is an authority figure, especially a parent, early in life, they actually put off having sex and taking risks. This is secular research. Parents, grandparents, you mentioned parents, but grandparents have a very important role in speaking to their grandchildren. A lot of grandparents spend more time with the kids, even grandchildren, than the parents do. Uncles, speaking to men. Uncle, you have a duty. It's not just parents. Every person has a role in nurturing young people.
So we
Yes,
should
that's
actually
good.
just repeat that, because what you said was actually really huge, right? That if a parent or an authority figure has the conversation with a child at a young age, the child is less likely then to act out sexually when they reach that age. I mean, that
Correct.
is huge, because
Yes.
I think for a lot of us as well, we kind of have the opposite. The myth is that if we talk to our kids too early about sex, they're going to go and run off and want to try and experiment. And you're
Yes.
saying, actually,
Yeah.
no, statistics show exactly the opposite.
Correct. And also it shows that if the parents and grandparents have talked, and aunties, uncles have provided that safe place for the child, if the child, something was to happen, like the child is exposed to porn or even some abuse, they will come
They're more likely to share
to
that.
the parent
Yeah.
Yeah.
or to the
Yes.
grandparent. That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
extremely important in today's
Yes.
culture.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that's something we don't think about at all. That is absolutely so key, because there's so much abuse and so much evil in the world, if it gets said that way. That the parents and those father figures, or those elderly respected people, need to have that access. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's fostering that relationship early, isn't it? It's
Yes.
fostering
Yeah.
that safe place that you can go to that adult and they're not going to shoot you down or clam up or make it awkward. Like you're building that relationship, that open relationship at an early age. So
Yeah.
so then
I
my
mean,
question then, Patricia, is then how early can we start that conversation? Right? I mean, how early is too early? Is there a too early?
it
Like
is
how early
never
do
too early.
as adults start to talk about this stuff with our kids?
Mm.
It is never too early to talk to kids. And I believe that most of your audience are men. So I think one of the things is that men tend to leave these early conversations to the mums.
Mm.
And that is so wrong. Because,
Yeah.
and you think, oh, I can never talk to my daughter. Hello, if your daughter grows up and decides to get married, but chances are she's going to marry a man. And you
That's
are the
right.
first man in her life.
Right.
Yes.
You need to be the role model.
Yes,
You
that's true.
need to be the voice in her life. And your son is going to grow up. And if you are not the role model, you know where he's going to look? E-Safety Commissioner just published a research. And it tells us, interestingly, that young men, and they talked to over 100 men between 16 and 21, and they said the majority of men said that they get their identity from online influencers.
Wow.
Wow.
How pathetic is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So men from a very early age, and the question being how early? Never too early. And I tell people, when your child is old enough to say, these are my fingers and these are my toes, your son should also learn to say, and this is my penis and this is my scrotum. It's just another part of the body. And your
Yeah.
daughter should, be learning about the vagina, the vulva, just body parts like everything
Yeah.
else. The right words for the body are important, particularly in today's culture of the
Yes.
transgender phenomenon, when
Yes.
people are finding it difficult, even politicians and health professionals, to even say what is a woman. We need to be teaching our children very early that it is a good thing to be a boy. It is a good thing to be a girl. We have a book called You and Me by the Book, which is a picture book, which we encourage parents to read with children who are preschool.
Yeah, I think that's really key. And talking to your children as early as you can about their body parts. There's no embarrassment in that when the children are really, really young. It's only if you try to do that when the children are older and developing, that becomes a major stumbling block. Isn't that true?
Yeah, that's true, because once you introduce the conversation. So what I tell parents of very young children is, yes, tell them the body parts, teach them, but also teach them that these are special parts of the body for a special thing, because God made these for the special job of making babies. So these parts of your body are precious. They are not toys. not to be
Yes.
played with. So
Mm.
you can play with your fingers and your nose and your ears, but your genitals, those are special part God gives you. So they're not toys. And to teach them that there is an appropriate and inappropriate time to, talk about your genitals, like maybe not when, your grandmas or the neighbors have not dropped in for a cup of tea. But,
Well, you're sitting down for
so
Christmas lunch with the extended family.
that's right. So teaching, and that's a really good opportunity to
Yeah.
teach boundary setting
Yeah.
and appropriate behavior. So, we need to take opportunities from a
Yeah.
very early age.
And often as parents, we get a little embarrassed, so we give our kids that little cutesy name for their genitals as opposed to the actual names, like the penis and the scrotum, etc. Why is that important to use the actual names at a very young age with our kids?
Well, there's at least two reasons. There's many, but I tell parents, your son has a penis and scrotum. He doesn't have a dick, a willy, or a Kevin, or whatever you call it. And your daughter has a vagina, vulva. Don't call it front holes or bickies or something. Give it the right words. Why? At least two reasons. One is your children need a language to talk to you.
Yes.
And the other one is they could see something which frightens them. And unless you have told them that this is genitals and it's important and it's precious, why do they need this language? And somebody could show them pornography. And let's face it, the average age of first porn exposure is about 10 years and dropping. I have sat with 8-year-old children who are compulsive porn users.
No.
And so I had a little boy talk to me how he was looking for a project. He was looking for cute pussycats for a project and ended up on a porn site. So you give them the right words, they get to come and tell you, I saw this or that.
Yeah.
So I tell you, I saw bickies. What does that mean? The second reason is that some children, there may be some kind of abuse or someone touching them. Again, they have the language and you have already told them. You see, children, if you haven't told them, they think that if something happens, it's their fault. So you need to be telling them, it's not your fault if something happens or you see porn. It's that other person's fault, or it's the pornography that's the problem. You can always come to me. And now you've got the words to tell me. That's why some of the reasons why it's important.
It's it is so important, and I really like the idea that we talk to kids as early as we can. I like the idea where if you can count your fingers and count your toes, that's a good indicator of when you should start to educate. And I guess there's levels of education. I mean, the first one obviously is to identify the organs and so forth, and call them by their name. So what would be the next step after that?
Yeah, by the time they get to primary school, you parents and grandparents need to be talking to them clearly about their brain development. I know you're thinking primary, talk about the brain. Yes, because they can understand that they have an emotional brain and a control brain and, self-control, and like you don't live by your emotions. You need to teach these things very early. So teaching them about the brain, teaching them, building on how precious their bodies are, and they're clearly boy or girl, because in primary school, now our children are being taught gender fluidity. So we need to be preempting that. Dads, you need to be that role model. Uncles, grandparents, you need to be there, especially with your boys, teaching them what it means to be a boy, that there are many ways to be a boy, that there are some boys who are gentle and musical and like wearing pink. And then there are other boys who are like the ones who like to get out there and have the rough and tumble. And similarly with the girls, but especially with your boys, nurture them. So we need to be talking about the body, the brain. We need to be talking to our family children, the primary schoolers, about the types of families that they are likely to see. Otherwise, they come home and say, how can so-and-so have 2 dads or 2 moms? So we need to be talking. So those are basics: body, brain, family. And then we also need to talk to them something about basic sexuality, mommy, daddy, where do babies come from? Please do not tell them the babies came out of your umbilicus. Teach them there too simple facts.
Yes.
And unfortunately, primary school, we have to be talking to them about gender and about pornography. Simple facts about porn. So if I may have a minute, because it's so important, about pornography, we don't have to explain to primary schoolers what pornography is. Just tell them, if somebody shows you someone without clothes or doing something that makes you feel like, ew, this is uncomfortable. In our books, we call it wiggly and wriggly. Then just say, I don't like this, run away and talk to someone like mom or dad. So 3 pointers: say no, run away, talk to mom or dad. Very important that we teach them. And we have books for this, like we have books for everything else. So we have a book called The Birds and Bees by the Book, 6 books which deal with each of these issues. We have to talk to our primary schoolers.
I think it's so key that we have books, and I'm sure there's lots of them, but I mean, having listened to you, I would be recommending people get your hold of your books, because I think that makes this process simpler. If you can work through a book that talks to exactly what you've just described, I mean, that makes so much sense. Just as a byline, if people go onto your website, can they order the books through your website?
Yes, they can. Or they're in Coorong.
Yeah, great.
Christian bookstore. This is, of course, in Australia. Or through the website. It's links to the order site.
Okay, that's patriciaweerakoon.com, by the way, patriciaweerakoon.com. Patricia, I just want to bounce off that and come back to the fact that there's obviously going to be a traditional family, mom, dad, kids, whatever. Right, let me just speak into that space for a sec. So if that is a scenario for somebody listening, right, and they have a son and a daughter, right, is it generally that mom talks to the girl and dad talks to the boy? Do you recommend that? Do you recommend that each of them talks to the opposite gender? Like, what are your recommendations on that?
Well, I was brought up in a super traditional family, but of course, no one talked to me. I think my mom's ashes still leap around in the urn every time I talk about sex, but that's by the way. But what I would say is both parents have a role in talking to both girls, daughters, and sons. Now, there are particular things that probably a mother would be comfortable talking to a girl about. For instance, pubertal changes, menstruation. There are things that a mother could relate better with a girl, and, breast development, things she's uncomfortable with, the mother would be. Or if sometimes a single dad bringing up a daughter might need a grandmother or even an auntie or somebody who can talk to the child. Then some things, the father might be more comfortable. The son may be better to hear from the father, or for an uncle if a single mom's bringing up a boy. Like, for instance, it's kind of hard for a mother to discuss erections and ejaculations and night ejaculates and wet dreams with a little boy, because he's like, ew, what are you talking about? So it's probably better to have a male. But in general, a girl has to hear from a male point of view, and a growing up boy has to hear from a woman's point of view. And therefore, both parents need to talk to each other. And this we are assuming, unfortunately, many children grow up with one parent. But if there's 2 parents, they need to talk, and they need to know at what level who's going to talk about what. Parents do it in different ways. Some parents have this sort of event where they take one child away and they, have a talk, and then others, which I recommend, is drip feed. So from the time they are very young, just drip feed, just talk, just watch for teachable moments. So mom, you're walking with your son through the shopping center, and he stops at the lingerie store and he's kind of turns and looks. That's a teachable moment to just say, as you walk off, you say, hey, let's stop and grab a cup of tea or something, and, let's just talk about, and then just say, how you turned and looked. That's okay, because, you're now your mind, you're growing up, and, these things attract you. So let's talk about it, and there's nothing to be ashamed about it. So that's an entry. to discuss sexual development.
Yeah,
So,
it's like normalizing
yeah.
the conversation, isn't it? Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. So, so is it better? It's clearly better for the parents, the mum and dad, to do that education rather than a friend or something external to that. And how do parents who have left it later a bit, how do they start to have that conversation?
It's always so much of fun because this is something I get at. I haven't talked to my son or daughter. Usually the super traditional family. Didn't
Yeah,
even realize I need to do it. What do I do? What do I do? And I say, look, the first thing is, look, you need to have some opening there. And so
yeah,
you need to show your children that you are interested in their life. So first get a connection. You can't sit your son down at 15 and 16 and say, okay, I want to talk to you about sex. He's going to run out of the room or say, are you going off your head today? So you need a connection. So
yeah,
ask them about their life, ask them about their friends and social media. Talk to them. Have any of your friends, talked about, these kind of ugly pictures and things, these sexual pictures? What about, I've heard about boys and girls sending pictures to each other, sexting. Has that ever happened? So look what's living in their world. Make that an entry to the conversation. And of course, at the expense of repeating that we have books for everything, we do have a book for puberty called Growing Up by the Book, and a book for teens called Teen Sex by the Book. So there are, and these are my books, but there's lots of other good resources out there. So get yourself a resource, and just main thing is just do it.
Have the conversation. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah, just go ahead and have the conversation.
Patricia, I want to perhaps end on I want to go back to pornography because I think it is such a huge thing in today's society and for our kids. And as you just said, I think the average age is about 10 when kids are exposed, but you've had people as young as 8. And I think there are probably younger than that as well. Let's say that there will be some listening who are right. They're on the track. They've had the conversation, the pornography, masturbation thing. There'll be other parents who are going, oh, I suspect my 15-year-old son who's locking himself away for extended periods of time in either his bedroom or his bathroom or something, like there's probably something else happening there. How do we try and broach that conversation if traditionally we haven't had that conversation and we have a reasonable relationship, but perhaps behavior has changed and we're sensing, or we've even found something that's been left in the internet history or whatever. How do we broach that with our kids?
Yeah, the first thing I would say to parents is do not freak. Do not say, how could you do this to me? What have you been doing? Don't. Because that's the surest way of creating shame and guilt and further hiding of what they are doing.
yes,
So don't shame and guilt the child. But you are the parent. And therefore, it is your right to keep the child accountable to you about any action. So the important thing is to just approach the child, and especially if he or she, we can't just assume it's the boys. We have now increasing number of girls who are watching pornography. You just call the child and say, look, I'm concerned about this. I love you. And I just want to explore whether anything is happening. What's happening? Are you watching anything? Or I saw this. It is not, I am not blaming you. I want to help you. So right from the beginning, take away the blame and therefore reduce the shame and the guilt. But be the one who says, I don't blame you. I want to help you. And then talk to them, if it's a 15-year-old, the dangers of porn. Talk to them about what it's doing to their brain. Talk to them the fact that pornography is not just something playful, that it is actually a form of sex slavery often to the women who are being used. Talk to them about what porn will do to their future in terms of relationships. So talk to them about the science and the what it's doing to them. Then you say, look, I want to help you. So let's work out ways that you can work through this. Because by which time they begin to understand this is really not good for me. And do it in small stages. So don't sort of dump everything. Do it slowly. Be the supportive parent who walks with them. Look, you can put all the external filters and accountability software, but finally, it's an internal filter. And if you're listening to this as a Christian parent, a Christian father, your role modeling is extremely important. So you are tempted to use porn. First thing is you need to draw back and then speak to your child and give them the better narrative for sex, because porn gives them a very poor, perverted narrative. Give them God's good story for sex.
That's true.
It's good. It's great.
That's
I mean, there's
good.
so much in this week's show. We'll have to bring it to a close because we're out of time. But our special guest has been Dr. Patricia Weerakoon. Encourage you absolutely to go and have a look around the website and check out those books that she's got, patriciaweerakoon.com, patriciaweerakoon.com. And it seems like there's a book for everything, which is fantastic because let's be honest, as parents, this is a tricky subject to navigate, and any help we can put in our own lap with regards to helping our kids in this area is a great thing to do. Patricia, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I'm sure we'll get you back on the show because there's lots more that we can explore in this space. But thanks so much for your time today with Momentum.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching this week's show, and we hope you subscribe to Momentum so you can find out what's happening in the shows in the future.
Absolutely. And keep an eye on our website too. That's momentumaustralia.org. There you'll find all of our shows and a whole heap of resources to help you on your journey. That is momentumaustralia.org.
Until next time, keep moving forward
with Momentum.